Good evening, everybody. Today we're going to read Lord of the Rings, Return of the King by J.R. Tolkien. I do not own rights to this publication. I'm going to begin with chapter 11, or according to my book, it's chapter 1 of book 6. Regardless, it should be titled The Tower of Cirith Ungol. Sam roused himself painfully from the ground. For a moment he wondered where he was, and then all the misery and despair returned to him. He was in a deep, dark outside the undergate of the orcs' stronghold. Its brazen doors were shut. He must have fallen stunned when he hurled himself against them. But how long had he lain there? He did not know. Then he had been on fire, desperate and furious. Now he was shivering and cold. He crept to the doors and pressed his ear against them. Far within, he could hear faintly the voices of orcs clamoring, but soon they all stopped or passed out of hearing, and all was still. He heard. His head ached, his eyes saw phantom lights in the darkness, but he struggled to steady himself and think. It was clear at any rate he had no hope of getting into the orc's hold by the gate. He might wait there for days before it opened, and he could not wait. Time was desperately precious. He no longer had any doubt about his duty. He must rescue his master or perish in the attempt. The perishing is more likely, and will be a lot easier anyways, he said grimly to himself, as he sheathed Sting and turned from the brazen doors. Slowly he groped his way back into the dark along the tunnel, not daring to use the elven light. And as he went, he tried to fit together the events since Frodo and he had left the crossroads. He wondered what that time was. Somewhere between one day and the next, he supposed. But even of the days, he had quite lost count. He was in the land of the darkness, where the days of the world seemed forgotten, and where all who entered were forgotten too. I wonder if they think of us at all, he said, and what is happening to them all away there, he wondered. He waved vaguely in the air before him, but he was in fact now facing southward, as he came back to Shalob's tunnel. Not west. The westward in the world is the drawing to the noon upon the 14th day of March in the Shire reckoning. Hold up. And even now Aragog was leading the Black Fleet from Peligre, and Mary was riding with the... Did I skip a page? I did not. I'm going to start the sentence over again. Out westward in the world it was drawing to noon upon the 14th day of March in the Shire reckoning, and even now Aragorn was leading the Black Fleet from Peligre, and Mary was riding with Roham down the Stone Wain Valley, while in the Minas Tirith flames were rising, and Pippin watching the madness growing in the eyes of Denethor. Yet amid all the cares and fears of thoughts of his friends turned constantly to Frodo and Sam. They were not forgotten, but they were far beyond aid, and no thought could yet bring any help to Samwise, Hamfist's son. He was utterly alone. He came back at last to the stone door of the orc passage, and still unable to discover the catch or bolt that held it, he scrambled over as before and dropped softly to the ground. Then he made his way stealthily to the outlet of Shalob's tunnel, where the rags of her great web were still blowing and swaying in the cold airs, for they seemed to Sam, after the noosome darkness behind, but the breath of them revived him. He crept cautiously out. All was ominously quiet. The light was no more than that of a dusk at a dark day's end. The vast vapors that arose from Mordor and went streaming westward passed low overhead, a great welter of clouds and smoke now lit again beneath with the sullen glow of red. Sam looked up towards the Orc's tower, and suddenly from its narrow windows lights stared out like small red eyes. He wondered if they were some signals. He fear of the orcs forgotten whilst he and his fear of the orcs forgotten for a while in his wrath and desperation now returned. As far as he could see, there was only one possible course for him to take. He must go on and try to find the main entrance of the dreadful tower. But his knees felt weak, and he found that he was trembling. Drawing his eyes down from the tower and the horns of the cleft before him, he forced his unwilling feet to obey him, and slowly listening with all his ears, peering into the dense shadows of the rocks beside the way, he retraced his steps past the place where Frodo fell. And still the stench of Shalabs lingered, and then on and up until he stood again in the very cleft where he had put on the ring and seen Shagrat's company go by. There he halted and sat down. For a moment he could drive himself no further. He felt that once he went beyond the crowns of the pass, he took one step veritably down into the land of Mordor. That step would be irrevocable. He could never come back. Without any clear purpose, he drew out the ring, put it on again. Immediately he felt the great burden of its weight. He felt afresh, and now more strong and urgent than ever, the malice of the eye of Mordor, searching, trying to pierce the shadows that it had made for its own defense, but which was now hindered in its unquiet and doubt. As before, Sam found that his hearing was sharpened, and that to his sight the things of the world seemed thin and vague. The rocky walls of the path were pale, as he had seen through the mist, but still at a distance he heard a bubbling of Shalab in her misery, the harsh and clear and very close it seemed. He heard cries and the clash of metal. He sprang to his feet, pressed himself against the wall beside the road. He was glad of the ring, for here was yet another company of orcs of the march. Or so at first he thought, and then suddenly he realized that it was not so. His hearing had deceived him. The orcs' cries came from the tower, whose topmost horn was now right above him, on the left hand of the cleft. Sam shuddered and tried to force himself to move. There was painfully something devilry going on. Perhaps, in spite of all the orders, the cruelty of the orcs had mastered them, and they were tormenting Frodo, or even savagely hacking him to pieces. He listened. As he did so, a gleam of hope came to him. There could not be much doubt. There was fighting in the tower, and the orcs must be at war among themselves. Shagrat and Gorbeg had come to blows. Faint as was the hope that his guests brought him, it was enough to rouse him. There might be just a chance. His love for Frodo rose above all other thoughts, and, forgetting his peril, he cried out loud, "I'm coming, Mr. Frodo!" He ran forward, clambered up the path, and over it. Once the road turned left, he plunged steeply down. Sam had crossed into Mordor. He took off the ring, moved it moved it may be by some deep premonition of danger, though to himself he thought only that he wished to see more clearly. Better have a look at the worst, he muttered. No good blundering about in the fog. Hard and cruel and bitter was the land that met his gaze. Before his feet, the highest ridge of the Elfin Death fall steeply into the great cliffs down into the dark trough. On the further side of which rose another ridge, much lower, its edge notched and jagged, with crags like fangs that stood out black against the red lights behind them. It was the grim Morgue in the inner ring of the fences of the land. Far beyond it was almost straight ahead, across a wide lake of darkness dotted with tiny fires. There was a great burning glow. From it rose a huge columns of swirling smoke, dusty red at the roots, black above where it merged into a billowing canopy of roof that roofed in all of the accursed land. Sam was looking at Oradrun, the mountain of fire. Ever and anon in furnaces far below, its ashen cone would glow hot, and with a great surging and throbbing pour forth rivers of molten rock from chasms in its sides. Some would flow blazing towards Barad Dur down a great channels. Some would wind their way into the stony plain until they cooled and lay like twisted dragon shapes vomiting from the tormented earth. In such an hour of labor, Sam beheld Mount Doom, and then the light of it, curled off by the high screen of the Elfindule, Elfindule, yeah, from those who climbed up the path from the west, now glared against the stark rock faces, so that they seemed to be drenched with blood. It was the dreadful sight. Sam stood aghast, for now, looking at it to his left, he could see the tower of Sereth Ungul in all its strength. The horn that he had seen from the other side was only the topmost turret. Its eastern face stood up in three great tiers from the shelf in the mountain wall far below. Its back was a great cliff behind, and which it jutted out in pointed bastons, one above the other, diminishing as they rose, with sheer sides of cunning masonry. They looked northeast and southeast, about the lowest tier, 200 feet below where Sam now stood. There was a battlement wall enclosing a narrow court. In gate upon the near southeastern side opened on the broad road, the outer parapet of which ran upon the brick of a precipice, until it turned southward and went winding down into the darkness to join the road that came over Morgul Pass. Then on it went through a jagged rift into Morgue, out into the valley of Gorgoroth, and away to the Barad Dur. The narrow upper way on which Sam stood leapt swiftly down by stair and steep path to meet the main road under the frowning walls close to the tower's gate. As he gazed at it, suddenly Sam understood, almost with shock, that its stronghold had been built not to keep enemies out of Mordor, but to keep them in. It was indeed one of those works of Gondor long ago, the eastern outpost of the defences of Ithilien, made when, after last alliance, men of western Nice kept watch of the evil land of Sauron, where his creatures still lurked, but with the Nar Narcoast and Carcoast, the towers on the 10th. So here too where the vigilance had failed. The treachery had yelled up to the tower of the Lord of the Ring Wraiths, and now for long years had been held by evil things. Since his return to Mordor, Sauron has found him useful, for he had few servants by many slaves of fear. And still its chief purpose, as of old, was to prevent escape from Mordor. Though, if an enemy were so rash as to try and enter the land secretly, then it may also a last unsleeping guard against any who might pass vigilance of Morgul and out of Shalab. Only too clearly Sam saw how hopeless it would be for him to creep down under those many-eyed walls past the watchful gate. And even if they did so, he could not go far on the guarded road beyond, even if the black shadows, lying deep from the red glow, were not wretch, would shield him long from night-eyed orcs. But desperate as the road might be, his task was now far worse. Not to avoid the gate and escape, but to enter it alone. His thoughts turned to the ring, but there was no comfort there, only dread and danger. No sooner he had come to sight of Mount Doom, burning far away, than he was aware of a change in a burden, as it drew near to the great furnaces where, in the deep of time, it had been shaped and forged. The ring of power grew, and it became more. It had become more fell, untamable, save by some mighty will. As Sam stood there, even though the ring was not on him but hanging by its chain around his neck, he felt himself enlarged, as if he were robed in a huge distorted shadow of himself. A vast and ominous threat halted upon the walls of Mordor. He felt that he had from now on only two choices: to forbear the ring, though it would torment him, or to claim it, and challenge the power that sat in the dark hold beyond the valley of the shadows. Already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise, the strong hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and enemies flocking to his call as he marched to the overthrow of Barad-dûr. And then all the clouds rolled away, and the white sun shone. And of his command the vague of Gorgoroth came to the garden of flowers and trees, brought forth fruit. He had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own, and all this could be. In the hour of trial, it was the love of his master that helped most to hold him firm. But also deep down in him lived, still unconquered, his plain hobbit sense. He knew to the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden, even if such visions were not a mere cheat or betray him. The one small garden of free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to the realm, but his own hands to use. not the hands of others to command. And anyway, for all those notions are only a trick, he said to himself. He'd spot me and cow me before I could so much as shout out. He'd spot me pretty quick, and if I put that ring on now in Mordor, well, all I can say is things look as hopeless as a frost in spring. Just when being invisible could be really useful, I can't use the ring. And if I get any further, it's going to be nothing but a drag and a burden every step. So what's to be done? He was not ready in any doubt. He was not really in any doubt. He knew that he must go down to the gate and not linger any more. With a shrug of his shoulders, and he shake it off the shadows and dismiss the phantoms, he began slowly to descend, which each step seemed to diminish. He had not gone far beyond. He had shrunk again to a very small and frightened hobbit. He was now passing under very small walls of the tower, and the cries and the sounds of fighting could be heard, and with his unaided ears. The moment the noise seemed to be coming from the court behind the outer wall. Sam was about halfway down the path when out of the dark gateway into the red glow where came two orcs running. They did not turn towards him. They were making for the main road, but even as they ran, they stumbled and fell to the ground and lay still. Sam had seen no arrows, but had guessed that the orcs had been shot down by others on the battlements and hidden in the shadows of the gate. He went on, hugging the walls to his left. The look upward had shown him that there were no hope of climbing it. The stone work rose 30 feet within a crack or ledge, its overhang courses like inverted steps. The gate was the only way. He crept on, and as he went, he wondered how many orcs lived in the tower with Shagrat, and how many Gorbag had, and what they were quarreling about, if that was what was happening. Shagrat's company had seemed to be about 40, and Norbag's more than twice as large, but the course of Shagrat's patrol had only been a part of his garrison. Almost certainly they were quarreling about Frodo and the spoil. For the second Sam halted, and for suddenly things seemed to be clear to him, almost as if he had seen them with his own eyes. The mithril coat. Of course Frodo was wearing it, and they would find it. And from what Sam had heard, Gorbag would covet it. But the others of the Dark Tower were at present Frodo's only protection, and if they were set aside, Frodo might be killed out of hand at the moment. "Come on, you miserable sluggard," Sam cried to himself. Now for it. He drew the sting, ran towards the open gate. But just as he was about to pass under its great arch, he felt a shock, as if he had to run into some web like Shalab's, only invisible. He could see no obstacle, but something too strong for his will to overcome, barred his way. He looked about, and then within the shadow at the gate, he saw the two watchers. They were like great figures seated upon thrones, each of the three joined bodies. The three heads faced outward and inward and across the gateway. The heads had vulture faces, and on their great knees were laid claw-like hands. They seemed to be carved out of huge blocks of stone, immovable, and yet they were aware some dreadful spirit of evil vigilance abode in them. They knew an enemy, visible or invisible. None could pass unheeded. They would forbid his entry or his escape. Hardening his will, Sam thrust forward once again. Why am I yawning? And halted with a jerk, staggering as if from a blow upon the breast, and headed. Then, greatly daring, because he could think of nothing else to do, answering a sudden thought that came to him, he drew slowly out the vial of Galadriel and held it up. Its white light quickened swiftly, and the shadows under the dark arch fled. The monstrous watchers sat there, cold and still, revealed in all its hideous shape. For a moment Sam caught a glimmer in the black stones of their eyes, and the very malice of which made his quail. Slowly he felt their wills waver and crumble into fear. He sprang past them, but even as he did so, thrusting the vial back into his bosom, he was aware, as painfully as if a bar of steel had snapped to behind him, that their vigilance was renowned, and far those evil heads had come high, shrill cries that echoed in the towering walls before him. Far up above, like an answering signal, a harsh bell chimed a single stroke.